I'm just sharing some things from a data science conference I happen to go to, and then it's more of just general discussion about OKC analytics, what our plans are for next year, how we're going to change some things up, kind of more of an open forum discussion. So this is kind of a good time for, you're good. And so an overview, going to cover the Open Data Science West conference I went to a little bit, show you a brief bit of a presentation I just made to the Python users group based on a particular library that they had talked about there, and then just kind of going over OKC Analytics current and future plans. So ODSC West, it's Open Data Science. They have a West conference, one on the East Coast. They also have one in Europe. I can't remember where else they have it. They've had it for a few years, and I was trying to find a conference that covered more than just, say, one programming language. Usually I go to like the SAS Global Forum that they have because that's the primary language I use. But this conference covered Python, R, just a gambit of programming language, which was really nice. But there were a couple of things about the conference that were interesting, like you pay, I think overall my early registration ended up being like $1,800 for the 4-day pass to go to like the workshops and everything. But then on the last day, most of their talks had canceled. And so there was hardly anything happening on the last day. So it was a little weird. I think they were gonna like reimburse people. But I will say one of the better parts of the conference, was all the references that you receive from it. And I was just gonna briefly talk about 2 talks in particular that I thought were really good. They weren't really workshops or anything like that, but I just felt like the information they provided was really helpful. Again, this conference is kind of expensive. I don't know if I'd say it was 100% worth the money, just because it's a 4-day long conference. Again, the last day was kind of cut completely. The workshops weren't really 100% like workshops. I found it more useful just to have the links to everybody's GitHub examples and going over them after the fact, but I think that can happen a lot at conferences. However, like the SAS Global Forum, that's one conference when I've gone there and I've gone to workshops, like it's 100% hands-on. It's very different. Of course, they've been doing that conference since the 70s, had a lot of practice. So it is fairly young. I do think it's good experience. They have a lot of vendors that come there. They have like a career fair that you can do. So I did find it useful for networking purposes, meeting people, kind of knowing what other companies are doing out there. And it was a total of 4 days. The first 2 days were primarily all workshops, and then the next 2 had kind of talks and workshops intertwined throughout it. One person in particular that I heard talk, I can't say her last name. I think it's Kozrogov. Cassie, amazing person. She is so personable. She's the chief decision scientist at Google, which I had no idea that was even a title that people could have. And I put a hyperlink, and I'll share this link on Meetup with it, but I put a link to her actual slides. And her talk was more of one that made you feel kind of like, I'm not alone in the data science space as far as making it useful. And she had several things that she kind of went over. She had a bunch of different tips, but her main focus was when you have data scientists on your team and you're a manager, you need to be setting clear expectations and goals, actually understanding what you have. And so it was nice to actually have somebody on that level at Google breaking it down to that level in that large of a room with leadership and managers from all these larger companies there. And everybody that was a part of it that was like a data scientist, we almost like gathered and swarmed around her after the talk and just asked her all kinds of questions. And she was very candid. Like she followed me back on Twitter, which I did not think she would do. And she even connected with me on LinkedIn. Again, just an incredibly personable individual. She has many talks that she has out there. So even if you just Google her, looking at the other talks she's given. But I found the tips that she went over were really helpful, and I just kind of listed them out there. I won't go too far into them, but really the things that I took away, data quality is a big thing I think we've all probably dealt with. Not everybody maybe being as concerned about the data quality as maybe we all everybody else is who's actually doing the grunt work. But then also testing was one of her big key points, and that's how you build trust. So I really like that she covered some things that I find from a high level, whenever I've had conversations with people, it's hard to get across. So I actually plan to share this talk with my boss. Be like, hey, here's kind of how you actually make this useful, and here's the steps you have to go through. Because one thing that was just reiterated in almost every single talk was about how much time we all have to spend cleaning our data, mining it, cataloging it. And that's what, literally, I didn't talk to one person that didn't say that was 80 to 90% of their job. And that they didn't actually get to spend a whole lot of time doing the fun pieces that they really wanted to do. So it's a bit of a systemic issue in kind of the data science and analytics space. And there really wasn't a solid plan for how we fix it. More so it's just kind of educating the higher ups on this is a process. This takes time. You have to have thought put into it before you start a project. You can't just have an answer and then expect somebody to be able to give it to you in 4 weeks. Like, that's just not how it works. Another individual that spoke was Isaac Reyes, and he had a really good talk about keys to data storytelling. Because that was another big part, a big topic that was covered was data visualizations, how to visualize your data. Funny enough, afterwards people were asking him what program he actually built some of his visualizations in, and he said he took the easy way out and made them in Excel. Because you know, for putting together the talk, it was just easier than making them to where they could be automated. And that was one of the big things that was missing from all the visualization talks, is that nobody really touched on how you make dynamic automated visualizations at all. Like, they just talked about, oh, you need to make visualizations, and they would show you these pretty outcome, you know, the final product, but never, well, how do you make it to where it's repurposed, so that all of that time you spent can actually be used to create kind of like a product? Didn't really get touched on, so that was a little odd to me, but at least people are having a conversation about storytelling. You know, he went through, this is a really good one to actually look at, because he kind of broke down the different types of visualizations people do, like, and graded them, so to speak. And so he gave a few different examples, just simply taking out the colors, changing it from a bar graph to a line graph, taking out the lines. Gestalt was mentioned in almost every single data science talk, repeatedly. So this was really the law of proximity. I'd never really read into it, but it was kind of interesting to go through an exercise where, you know, he showed how people perceive things differently. So there were a couple books. I'll try and find them and actually hyperlink to them, because they, again, same books were kind of reiterated through each one, and it kind of seemed like that's what all the big data visualization people were reading and referencing. Law of similarity, things of that nature. I'm trying to go see where he had, you know, he had some really neat ones where they would kind of fill in some of the area that you wanted to focus on. Not all of these, there were some that I didn't always agree with 100%, but again, I think it depends on your core audience. He actually kind of brought something up where you do, like the, what do you call it? That test where people are supposed to see the ink blot test, where you kind of do that with your higher ups and figure out how they visualize things. He kind of brought up doing something similar for himself with his peoples, that he kind of figures out how they actually see data and then uses those graphs for them. So staying very flexible was the big thing that he kept kind of bringing up. And there's this chart of the day apparently on Business Insider, and this guy checks it every single day, and he quote unquote grades them. So I was like, I didn't have any idea even a website always had graphs. So I thought that was kind of neat just to check out on a regular basis to see how places like Business Insider are even providing their data to the masses. And there were a couple, I'm trying to think of what else he kind of showed. Oh, Tufte. Is anybody heard of Tufte? Huge, what is it? The only thing worse than a pie chart is several of them. Everybody hates pie charts. Apparently it's like this god-awful thing. I will admit, I've had to make some, but I always make the donut chart. I don't actually make the pie chart, so that way if you need to do levels, I find it to be useful. So I don't think, quote unquote, pie charts are not useful, but I think people use them but just don't call them pie charts. They call them like the donut charts or things like that. But it was funny because every single person was like, I hate pie charts, like burn them, never use them again. And then, you know, above all else, show the data. He has some great books that he's written. I definitely would recommend checking them out. They've been extremely helpful just to kind of get ideas about graphing them. And then, you know, another one he did is showing if you do a low data to ink ratio, a high data to ink ratio. So his talk really just shows you different ways you can visualize the same information and, again, kind of do your own ink blot tests with your people internally. And so I think that's most, he showed a couple different ones. He actually charted his relationships. Apparently, he made this for a person he's dating at the moment, he said, which it's like, that's interesting. I mean, I've never actually heard anybody doing that approach. And, you know, he highlighted he doesn't speak to the person that he met in Brazil, much to probably his current person's happiness. Yeah, he was a cool guy. He's actually from Australia, and I'll see if I can find the stream of his talk to share, because they are supposed to be uploading videos of it. That's one really great thing. I need to see if I can share this, because there is one talk I noticed at the very end, it said, please do not share any of these things. But then we have access to the talk. And it was another data visualization one that I thought was really helpful. The company, I can't remember the name of it, but I really wanted to share that one. So I'm going to email them and just say, hey, can I just share this in general with a small group of analytics people just to see? So like, this is kind of difficult. It's like, you're giving us access. So this was neat how the graph went from being, you know, like this now to looking this way. And it's just so much cleaner. Like, even though there's hardly any color on it, it just is easier to read. So I thought that was really neat. Again, he kind of cheated and did all of these in Excel, which I was a little disappointed with. I was like, I wanted to know the code behind the visualization so I could try and use them. And then he's like, oh, no, I didn't do that. Like, cop out. Let me see. So those are the presentation. And then I was going to show real quickly, was it last week? Yeah, it was Wednesday, that I talked about Seaborn in the Python users group. It was in one of the data visualization talks, and they solely focused on Matplotlib and Plotly, but they barely mentioned Seaborn, which is the newer library that's built on top of Matplotlib and so much easier to use, immensely easier. So, and I can share, the link's in there and you guys can take a look at it, but you know, basically getting the data structured, as we all know in Python, can somewhat be a challenge, but once you have it, you know, in the structure you need, it's literally one line of code to make a really nice looking heat map with different colors, and then you can, you know, this just simply changes the color scheme to be of different like blues and greens. Some other cool visualizations that you can make, this is like a pair grid. So it sorts the Pokemon, this is a Pokemon data set, sorts the Pokemon by their total overall kind of strength, and then breaks it out by HP, attack, defense. So it's just kind of a different way of visualizing it, and you can see the gradients of the color. The Pokemon type with the highest totals is the darker shade of, I guess, burgundy-ish pink, and then it goes lighter. So this is kind of just a neat, simple visualization that showed a lot. KDE plots, these ones are a little bit hard, there's a little bit more code in it, but still fairly simple compared to a lot of other programs when you try to make something that looks like this. I mean, it just looks visually appealing. You can do basic bar plots. Again, most of these are single lines of code, which I found to be the most refreshing thing, because Matplotlib, I don't know, I tried to actually make equivalent graphs in Matplotlib to Seaborn, and I completely stopped trying because I couldn't get it to work. It was I was having to try and go through and educate myself way too much, and it's like, this is why Seaborn. Point plots, easily, add some pieces to where you can change the markers. These were really neat, doing multiple relationships. There's another way, let me see if I go farther down, where you can do categorical scatter plots. I thought these were pretty neat because the first one doesn't have the jitter on there, so it makes it to where the points are kind of all in one line, and they overlap, so you're not necessarily getting the density of it. But another way you can do it so it looks a little bit cleaner is you can get what's called a swarm. And so this one completely nothing overlaps. In this first one, the points do overlap some here, but when you add the swarm, it actually makes it to where nothing is overlapping with one another, which I thought was really kind of neat because it adds almost like the violin plot type of outline, but using the dots instead. And you can easily add the different hues. I'm trying to think. This one was kind of neat where you do a box plot. So it adds, again, the kind of the density to it based on how large the box is itself, which I've never actually seen a box plot like this. So I thought it was a really neat way to graph the data because most box plots, they're just boxes, but this takes the boxes to, I think, the next level. And then you have the violin plots, which are pretty popular. I thought this was kind of neat where you could actually split the violin plot and plot two pieces of data on the same violin plot. So again, simple single lines of code. And this one was really neat where you added the individual data points to it as well. Let me see if I can. And so you added, to make that happen, you added the palette of pastel so that you could actually see the lines, which was, again, kind of just another neat way to add an extra level of granularity to a graph. This was kind of combining the swarm plot with the violin plot. So whenever you have the swarm, instead of it being all the dots, it actually goes ahead and outlines it for you. So lots of different options to graph the same type of data. And I think I have the CSV because I found this Pokemon data set on somebody else's site that they had done some Seaborn examples with, but the CSV file was encoded in some way that it wouldn't work, so the only way I could get it to read the CSV file properly is I had to resave it. Sometimes that's the only way to do it. I don't know why. These are really neat, the KDE plots where you can do like the density, but then you also have kind of the distribution on each of the axes. I kind of like how this one is. It's essentially the same thing, but it gives it to you. It literally looks like somebody took an image from space, which is kind of neat because we all know sometimes higher ups like to see things that look really visually appealing, and they don't like looking at plain old graphs. And I was like, hey, easy way to get them to see density. It's like, I didn't take this. This is not from nature. This one was also kind of neat where it's the same KDE plot, but then again, adding the individual observations to it and doing like the pairwise relationships. And what got me was it literally just, again, so simple. And it kind of amazed me that nobody's talks at the data science conference focused on Seaborn at all. Like nobody talked about it. It was all about Matplotlib. And I think it's because people have a sense of comfort with Matplotlib right now, and Seaborn, even though it's built on top of it, it can do most of what it could pretty much do everything Matplotlib does. The only thing that you may have to use some Matplotlib syntax on is adding some of the more granular kind of details to it. If you want to adjust the axes or things like that. But for the most part, you by default get really nice visualizations that if you're working on it and you have to get something out like same day, it's pretty quick. And I thought this was kind of neat, the hex bin plots, which I hadn't really seen people use before, but I thought were kind of neat too. So again, the conference was, it was really helpful to go because I got information about this and I just had never came across it. I was like, what is this Seaborn? And so it was kind of neat. And I can share like the different GitHubs for the different examples they have because they have a lot out there. The one thing I have found to be kind of difficult to find are talks that actually break down, like here's the original data structure and here's how you have to manipulate it to get the graphs. Within this code, I actually have the syntax I used in Python to manipulate the data. Like I have it to where I pivoted it or I subset it. Because that was one thing I always found about all of these talks. They gave it to you in like perfect examples, but didn't actually break down for you how you get to that point. And so I actually added it to this example so you guys could actually see how it had to be manipulated to kind of create it. Because even on Seaborn's actual official reference, it does the same thing. It doesn't actually break down how you have to manipulate your data, which in Python I find to be very challenging in several ways. And so the next part is, so OKC Analytics is generally, we're a new group. This was our first year being active. We initially started doing our meetings in the evening, and then we migrated to now having them Monday afternoons. December is obviously a tough month for people, but really what the general purpose of our group is, we kind of came up, represent the natural synergy between the various programming languages that could be used for data and analytics. So really, we want to be a group that covers how you can use Python with R, with SAS, and then also showing people how you can install some of these programs and how to help troubleshoot errors and things of that nature. One of the big things we want to actually start showing people is, installing the programs from the very beginning. Like I was just trying to get the Markdown to work in R, and it was a huge pain because it kept throwing errors, and I finally came across somebody that you essentially deleted the current version of R and then you downloaded the newest one and then it fixed the problem. But I didn't think, because I went through and I did to install the latest programs and it just wasn't working. I had to completely delete them and start over. So just kind of things like that, coming up with a lot more tips and tricks, kind of 101 docs to show people, but then actually taking them through it. Because I find, we've had discussions, because Melissa's one of our co-organizers. Edgar wasn't able to make it, but that's been one of the things we've kind of found going to the different groups is they just cover the end product, but then not actually from start to finish, and it's that beginning and middle that we kind of want to help supplement for people. This is kind of a big one and where we could have more open forum discussion. We're trying to find kind of a pro bono project to work on as a group. We want to do it from start to finish, actually working with a local business or group that is trying to look at data in a meaningful way to benefit the community. One of them that we need to look into, there's a group in Tulsa that has some data on, I think, incarceration rates. So we've talked, that's one of them we might look at, but we actually want to go through like the whole process, data discovery, documenting it, doing like stakeholder interviews, things of that nature that people usually don't get unless they have experience doing it. And so we want to help create even better like kind of data stewards. And so that's kind of where we're at with OKC Analytics. I think some other things we want to do are weekend meetups where we offer data cleaning, mining, and model building meetups on weekends to provide overviews and best practices, again, supplementing that beginning and middle piece. Because, I love seeing all these great final models, but I'm like, how did you get there? Like, I actually want to show people how we can get there. And so we're trying to locate a free space we can use on the weekends. There's one, I can't remember what it is. It's on Film Row. And so I've got to submit the application to see if we can use it, but that's hopefully like kind of the space we'll use. But this would be in addition to actually doing kind of that project. And then we have our Gmail, OKC Analytics, gmail.com. Anybody can contact us. We're working on the website. I'm hoping to get it up over the break since I don't have to work, but we'll see. And really, if you guys have, because we were planning on talking about some potential projects or different groups to reach out to, so if you guys have any questions or want to talk about that, we can.